Good evening and welcome to our final conversation on the first day of the 51st quadrennial session of our General Conference. We bring you greetings live from Orlando, Florida. Let me thank Mayor Demings for his conversation earlier with us. Let me also thank our new president of the Council of Bishops, Bishop Byfield, for spending time with us just a few minutes ago. And certainly again to all of you who stayed with us through these continued dialogues for the day. As always, please drop your name, where you're from, your bishop, and certainly your district and any other pertinent information that you may want us to know, and we will govern ourselves accordingly. I am so thrilled to have someone who I really from afar look up to. He is a dear friend of my uncle, a family friend, someone who life perhaps is the best sermon any pastor or any leader could ever want to preach, who have adopted our Christian faith. A man who's from New Jersey, grew up in Delaware, graduate, HBCU graduate, Delaware State, presides over 500 churches in the state of Georgia, and he is the 132nd elected and consecrated bishop of this church. I thought it was funny we were talking earlier because my uncle is the 133rd, and Bishop, you reminded me that you always are in line together.
That's correct.
As you all lined up. But as someone said to me via text when I was saying I was going to interview, you are affectionately known as Stacey Abrams Bishop and Keisha Lance Bonner's Bishop.
And I'm honored to be here.
But my friend, Bishop Jackson, we're so honored and blessed to have you. And certainly to Kim Carter, who I know is watching. She was anxiously poking at my phone saying, when are you going to have my bishop? So Kimberly Carter, we have your bishop. Bishop Jackson, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
It's good to be with you.
Bishop, I know you were on with me a few months ago now when we had a conversation with Stacey Abrams about things going on in the ecosystem in Georgia. But the tectonic plates has once again shifted since the last time we talked. Add some background color from where you sit now as the Bishop of Georgia, overseeing 500 churches, and give the folks watching at home some background color to what's going on in the state of Georgia as we sit here today.
You know, it's interesting. When I went to Georgia and I had a meeting with Brian Kemp, and we were trying to get a hate crimes bill passed. And he said to me, Bishop, this is a new Georgia. And all of that. Well, the fact of the matter is I had a chance to respond to him, I guess about 2 months ago now, and I reminded him the new Georgia is not all that new. Because the fact of the matter is I think Georgia is the worst example of voter suppression. In 2018, for example, when Stacey Abrams ran for governor, they deleted over 500,000 people from the voting rolls.
We call that voter purging.
That's correct. And many of them people of color. And it's continued on. Even now, last week they talked about they're going to be purging over 100-some thousand people from the rolls.
And you can rest assured most of them will look like us.
Oh, absolutely. So Georgia is just, unfortunately, it's an emblem for where the country is today. For example, if you take SB 202, of course, the voting rights law, that law is simply a response to the big lie told by the former liar-in-chief that the election was stolen. I said to the governor, I said, how is it that in November, December, and January, you said the election had no fraud? It was not stolen, but now all of a sudden, you signed a bill called the Election Integrity Act, as if it's because there was no integrity in the election. So Georgia, I think, reflects, unfortunately, where our country is, and it's not a very good spot.
Bishop, what I love about you, one of the things I love about you is you do not mind getting in the way, or as the late John Lewis would say, causing good and necessary trouble. There are some of our faith and some just around an ecosystem who do not believe the church should be engaged and involved in certain matters, particularly those who do not fall outside the four walls on Sunday. You say what to those people, and why do you think it's so important for the church to be engaged and involved in the affairs going on around us?
Well, first of all, I think they're in denial. And I have a definition for denial, which would probably upset them, DENIAL. don't even know I am lying. Because the fact of the matter is, anybody who knows the history and the legacy of the Black church knows that, in fact, the Black church was really found for sociological reasons. Because of the fact, for example, you take the AME church, Richard Allen and them felt that God was not a respecter of persons on the basis of color and all of that. So therefore, they left St. George's Church because they did not believe how they were being treated was in fact godly. The Black church has always been a champion for social justice and civil rights. In fact, nothing for the advancement of Blacks in this country has occurred without the involvement and the leadership of the Black church. And so for the Black church not to be engaged and not to be involved would be a contradiction of its very own nature. And so, especially in a time like this, when many people have nobody to speak for them, the Black preacher in particular and the Black church must be there for them. So those who take that position, they're just in denial. And one thing, I know my grandmother didn't originate with her, but she said something to me years ago, which is even true today. She said, if you argue with a fool long enough, it'll be two fools arguing. So therefore, I don't even argue with them because you're just going to be generating heat, but not light.
You know, Bishop, sometimes we focus so much on what you do, you and your role as a bishop. We don't always get to talk about you, the person. I'm always fond of getting to know people in a deeper, more interesting way. We have people watching from around the world, AMEs, Baptists, people who don't respond to or consider themselves part of anything. Tell us a little bit about Bishop Reginald Jackson.
Well, if you talk to my daughter, Regina, who's a daddy's girl, she would say, my daddy's crazy. Those who know me well would think, gosh, if they only knew how he really was. I'm a person who believes that every single day you ought to get out of life everything that you possibly can.
Squeeze it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, everything. And I tell preachers all the time, you really have to have a life. If you become so caught up just with the church, then you're not going to be healthy for your congregation.
Heavenly minded, no earthly good.
That's correct. And in fact, unhealthy pastors do not develop healthy churches. So you've got to be able to unwind. For example, and when I say my daughter says I'm crazy, to me, the best place in the world to take a nap is a movie theater. I mean, it's dark. I'll go to the movie theater. I'll catch the first part of it, probably nod off in the middle, wake up in the end. But I've had me a good nap. So I love going to movie theaters. I like stuff like bowling. I'm not good at it at all, but at least I like going. I think you have to have a sense of humor. And I just think you just need to get everything out of every single thing. And I tell people, I don't like being around everybody. I don't like being around people who have no humor. And I don't like being around people who haven't been through anything. You have no idea how good God is if you've not been through anything. And so that's about as crazy as I am.
No testimony without a test.
That's correct. That is correct.
Bishop, I mentioned earlier, or I flirted with earlier in my introduction, you oversee roughly 500 churches in the 6th Episcopal District. I would probably argue from what I do for a living as a political consultant that you perhaps have the most consequential Episcopal district going into the 2018 midterms. Frame for us the 6th Episcopal District and what it looks like and how you see it.
Matter of fact, we have already begun in the 6th Episcopal District preparing for 2022 based on the assumption that the requirements of SB 202 are going to be in place.
The voter suppression law signed by Republican governors, the one where the governor essentially had a Black member of the legislature arrested because they were signing a bill in private and she happened to knock on the door.
6 white men underneath the picture of a plantation.
We've seen that movie before.
Oh, yes, we have. And so we have to begin now. And be frank with you, I'm very pleased because one of the wonderful things about Black folk is the more you tell us what we can do or make it hard for us to do, we become more determined we're going to do it. And so even though they're trying to make it harder with the absentee ballot and the voter ID, the ballot drop boxes, we're in the process now of trying to make sure that our people are not going to be restricted or suppressed by what they have in that law. And Georgia, again, I think in 2022 is going to be the most pivotal state as it relates to the midterm elections. We have the governor's race in Georgia, which is going to have national attention for a number of reasons. One, because hopefully Stacey Abrams will be running. But number two, it'll be against Brian Kemp, who I presume will be running without the blessing of Donald Trump. I really wish Trump did, because every time he helps folk in Georgia, we win. So I hope he'll change his mind on that. But then on top of that, we have a very critical Senate race, Reverend Raphael Warnock. And I think today he's probably the Republicans' #1 target. But I think Raphael Warnock is going to stun them again, because he's doing an excellent job as a senator. His record is appealing to people, whether they're conservative or moderate or liberal. I just think he's doing a terrific job, and I don't think there's a Republican in the state in whom they have overwhelming confidence that they're going to beat him. They're trying to get Herschel Walker to run. I said,
who does not live in Georgia.
That's correct. I said to Herschel, come on.
Run that play, please.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I don't think he would be that strong a candidate. Just having heard him try to talk about issues, and emphasize try. So it'll be interesting. But we're geared up and we're really ready for the fight.
Bishop, you were a few weeks ago now at the White House with my political big brother, Cedric Richmond, and others. Talk about your time at the White House and that meeting as much as you can about how important it was for you to be at the table and not on the menu. But talk about the conversations and what you plan to take from that meeting and transfer that down to the 6th district to help the state of Georgia.
Sure. It was a very, very good meeting. In fact, I was very pleased because when we got to the White House, a delegation from Texas was leaving, and they were there to discuss the voting bill they're trying to pass in Texas. And in fact, I was extremely pleased because they actually thanked Georgia, because they said some of what they did, they got from what we were trying to do in Georgia. And I responded to them. I was a little frustrated because I tried to get the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus to walk out when they were getting ready to pass SB 202. I wish they had walked out, but they
very
didn't.
symbolic when we do that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And they would not have been able to have a quorum to pass the bill on that day. So, but I also think that at the meeting, we talked about what we could try to do to try to circumvent some of these bills. We talked about the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the role the Black church can and should play in it. We also talked about the fact that even now we need to begin in terms of registering and organizing our people. And also, I'm hoping that we can persuade either CNN or MSNBC. I think there needs to be a national...
Or CBS.
Or CBS. Well, let me get CBS. Good plug. I like that.
Shameless plug.
True. Well, no, one of them, because I do think there needs to be a national town hall. In fact, on voting rights, especially in light of these 47 states and these hundreds of bills which they're trying to get through, because I really don't think much of the nation is really aware of the consequences. I think these bills, not only do they seek a suppressed vote, but they really put our democracy at great risk. And I think this is really something that ought to be a national town hall on.
We might can work on that, Bishop.
Oh, I'm gonna say some more because I have confidence in you.
we might can work on that. We talk about voting rights, but I want to talk about something that's personally important to me. Since 2016, it has been my personal mission to make sure Black men are engaged and informed, but also voting their interests. when I was on the grind for Hillary Clinton in 2016 all across this country, we learned after the November election that 13% of Black men voted for Hillary Clinton. I was around this country virtually, and at the latter part of this last campaign, trying to help Joe Biden and Kamala Harris come across the finish line. We were able to do that. We came across first. But that number increased to 20, some say 23%. So it seems to me there's a trend of Black men supporting candidates and interests that do not line up with what I think their priorities are. What do you think we collectively can do to help shift that trend the other way?
Yeah. Matter of fact, what you just mentioned is, for me, the most troubling thing about where Blacks are, and especially as it relates to Black men. One of the things, Black men tend to be more conservative among Black voters. And interestingly enough, I'm not sure, going back to being in denial, because the fact of the matter is, I'm not sure they can define for you what conservative is.
I was about to say, Bishop, I hate to cut you off, but you got to think about a candidate, Donald Trump, in 2016, who said Mexicans were rapists and thugs, build a wall. I mean, all the things. Fast forward the tape, he wins the election. He calls people SOBs.
That's correct.
NFL athletes, SOBs.
That's correct.
African countries, SO countries. Charlottesville, good people on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, some of the rhetoric and even some of the policy positions that he took as president, it actually worked against the long and short-term interests of Black men. So I'm not sure how that lines up with being conservative.
Well, that's what I say tonight, because, for example, what I've discovered, Black men have what I believe is this misconceived perception of what it is to be strong. I think one of the things that draws, or at least drew, some Black men to Trump, they viewed him as being strong. They viewed Democrats, unfortunately, and I think incorrectly, as being weak. Trump comes off as he's the macho man, and they become more caught up in the perception than it is the reality. Because, to be frank with you, I think he's wimpish. Everybody always fights to fight for him. He never fought a fight for himself. You see, even on January 6th, he gives his remarks and talks about, now I'm going to be going down there with you. He was nowhere near the Capitol. You see what I mean? So I think that's the issue with Black men. They own this thing about, you have to look strong. And for them, for example, I have no problem with Black men and guns, because you want to feel like you're secure. But a lot of stands they take, I think, are based on this misconceived perception of what it really means to be strong.
Bishop, I know we talked about voter suppression, and that seems to be what's loud in the ecosystem. But there's so many other issues that impact not just Georgia, but the country. I know my political father, Jim Clyburn, this week and the next 2 weeks will be spending a lot of time talking about expanding Medicaid. And I understand that Raphael Warnock, Senator Warnock, is going to be doing the same in Georgia. If you could give for us 3 issues outside of voting rights that you think are very important as we move forward in this country.
First, education. Second, the whole issue of health care. And third, I think in terms of Blacks and how we handle our money. I think those 3 things.
Economic empowerment.
Absolutely. Because first of all, unfortunately in this country, especially in our public school system, I have a real concern. We have a dual education system, one predominantly rural and suburban white, where kids do well, and another one primarily urban and people of color, where they get a poor education. It bothers me every May and June that millions of Blacks would get a diploma but not have an education. For example, this whole thing about the critical race theory infuriates me, because they have, again, going back to denial, that the critical race theory is getting young whites to think that they're racist and all this kind of stuff. And yet what bothers me is you never hear the same concern when every black kid born in this country gets ready to go to school. They're labeled special need, disadvantaged, at risk, only because they're black.
And they're written off.
You see, and so my thing is, you never have any concern about that, but now you're concerned because your children might learn the truth about American history. You know, this whole thing about doing away with this is nothing more than an opportunity, or at least they believe an opportunity, to whitewash American history. So education one. Then the whole thing about health care. The folk with more issues related to health than anybody in the country are black folk. And I tell blacks all the time, first thing, being born black in this country is a pre-existing condition.
I'm going to use that if you don't mind. I'll give you credit the first time, but after that.
No problem. Now, the word needs to get out. If you're black in this country, you've got a pre-existing condition. And the third thing, I'm very concerned, if you take black income over $1 trillion a year, we'd be about 12th or 14th if we were a nation in terms of gross national product and all of that. And yet we have nothing to show for it. Too many blacks have no savings account. We do a very poor job as it relates to stewardship of our finances and all. And so I think that's an issue we really have to come to grips, and especially with young blacks.
I want to flirt with two issues really quick, and I don't want you to date it, but I do want to flirt. Affordable housing, big deal. And you have your heart in New Jersey. Senator Cory Booker is really in the middle of the conversations around police reform. Two critical issues. You say what to those two things, and how you think they impact communities that look like ours and come from communities that look like ours.
Let me say this. I'll deal with the policing issue first. I think it is absolutely insulting that they were having all this trouble getting this policing stuff passed. And when I saw Senator Scott from South Carolina, and he said something about America is not a racist country and all, I was so mad I turned the channel because I said I can't look at the rest of this because again, everybody knows most of our policemen serve us well, but to deny that there's a problem with policing or to put in place some reform, especially where they're not immune from their actions, I think is utterly irresponsible. And they always look out for law enforcement as if blacks have always got to be the one with the problem. And I think that needs to be addressed. Then on the first issue that you raised, there's some things which actually do cause me to toss and turn at night, and that does happen to be one of them. And I really want to commend your mentor, Jim Clyburn. I think Jim, much to his credit, is in tune really with where the major issues affecting us are. And so I'm just glad he's a good AME.
There you go.
But he really seems in tune. And I do think there's some things that black leadership is really going to have to identify. As I say, these are the 3 or the 4 major issues that we need to address. We've got a ton of them, but you can't address all of them at one time. But I do think we need to do something in terms of prioritizing something.
Let's shift lanes on the highway for a second. Let's talk about what do you see as the immediate needs of the church to meet the concerns of the needs of 2021 and beyond.
It's interesting. I am a big critic of the black church.
That's why you love it so much.
Yes. Well, and I say that because, I grew up in a period of the civil rights movement. Dr. King was alive, and it was a real historical time. And in that period, say in the 60s and all, you couldn't get a seat in a black church on Sunday morning because churches were packed. And I believe they were packed because the black church was so engaged in what was happening and impacting black people. They really sensed that the church cared. And in fact, again, most of the leadership of the civil rights movement were black preachers.
Mm-hmm.
They spoke to issues that were relevant and important. And one of the reasons I'm a critic over the last 35, maybe 40 years, we've become caught up in what I call the obsession of praise.
Now you're preaching.
And I think, anybody with common sense is going to praise God, just for daily blessings.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up in the morning with all the crap that's going on, being in your right mind. So, nobody ought to have to tell you to praise God. My concern is that I think the black church today, we are so caught up with praise that we also abandon service. And there's a passage in the book of Amos, which I don't think there's a week that goes by where I don't think about this passage in the book of Amos. It's in the 5th chapter, around the 21st, 24th verses. And really it's an indictment on the black church. It says, I despise your feast days. I have no regard for your solemn assemblies. Though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Take away from me the noise of your songs and the melody of your stringed instruments I will not hear, but let justice run down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I think there's a praise that turns God off, where we praise him but don't serve him. Our children not getting a good education, but we can't get involved in that because praise is what we do. Blacks, every 26 hours, some black is shot by somebody in law enforcement, but we can't get involved with that because praise is what we do. And I think the black church, if you go back again, the greatest period of growth in the history of the black church was when the church was more socially active. I think today people wonder if the church really cares. When they had the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri a few years ago, one of the things that struck me, I was one of those who went to Ferguson, and I thought the young folk asked a terrifically relevant question, but an indictment, and it hit me hard. We all showed up at this crisis, and they asked, where have y'all been? You said, and I thought it was a very relevant question, and we're still trying to find the answer where we've been.
Bishop, I'm 36. It seems as if there's been a drift and a shift in terms of young people and our involvement in the church. You're in Georgia, where you have Atlanta.
Yes.
The meeting place for young black millennials in particular.
Correct.
How do you plan to engage and persuade young people that they have a place in the church? And historically, they are obligated in such a way to be a part of the church, and how that shapes how we get towards that more perfect union that we learned about in elementary school.
There was a movie, I guess, and it had a title, I think it was a movie, entitled, Can You Hear Me Now?
I know it's a Verizon commercial.
Yeah, somewhere I heard it. You see, and the fact of the matter is, I really think that young blacks, millennials, I really think they're going to come in and force the black church to become more relevant. And in fact, to also become more biblically true. Because, for example, they are concerned about the issues that impact them. And you find a church that impacts, doesn't seek to impress, but seeks to impact the lives of people.
That's a good word.
I'll show you a church that has a whole lot of young folk in it. Matter of fact, one of the Best thing, some years ago, I was in Detroit to preach, and I went to barbershop back when I had a little hair.
You downsize when you get older.
That's what you do. All I know is time is filled with swift transition. So, but I was in the barbershop, and I just, like I said, I'm in town, and tell me, what's a good church I can go to? And they named several churches. And there was a young black guy, he says, no, none of them. And he gave a name of a church. And I said, why are you so adamant I don't go to that church? And he talked about the different ministries they had. And then he said this. He said, in a word, they give a damn. And I have never forgotten that. I think that single mom trying to raise 3 children wants to know does that church give a damn. Most of our churches today, the community right outside their front door, that church has no relationship with those people in that community. It was a time in the black community, a church didn't need a parking lot because most of the people who went to that church walked across the street or down the street. Today, most of the people who come to our churches, they drive a ways to get to church. And I think the church has got to become more community-centered and interact with the people in those communities.
We're coming around the mountain. Here we come. I know you're short on time. You have been very loud about holding corporations accountable for their political or non-political actions. Why is that important, Bishop?
Well, I think it's critically important because the fact of the matter is, historically, blacks have contributed so much to this nation's wealth.
We've made these corporations.
Oh, absolutely. And my thing is, why should we keep giving our money and buying products from companies that don't have our back? I was furious in Georgia because when they passed SB 202, we were trying to get corporations to speak out against it. And after the legislature passed and the governor signed SB 202, somebody sent me a copy of an in-house memo from Delta Airlines where they actually commended the legislation. And said,
crazy.
Yeah.
What you just talked about.
Yeah, talking about it could have been worse and all this kind of crap. And then Coca-Cola, their CEO had said after the shooting in Minneapolis, said that we can do better. We've got to side more with Black Lives Matter and all that. But yet they said nothing about this. So when we black preachers brought up about a boycott, the next thing you know, Coca-Cola spoke out against SB 202. Delta Airlines spoke out against SB 202. And my thing is a little too late. And so we've just really got to bring pressure to bear on corporate America because really the black community continues to make them wealthy, and yet they do nothing to advance our cause.
My last question for you, and I'm going to let you go. When your time is up as an AB bishop, what do you hope the church historical records will say about Reginald T. Jackson?
I would hope it really would say that Bishop Jackson made a difference, or he tried to make a difference, that I was more prophetic than I was preaching, that I was more interested in kingdom work as opposed to church work. That's what I hope they would say.
My friend, my uncle's friend, family friend.
Well, I'm glad to be with you.
From the 6th Episcopal District down in Georgia, Bishop Jackson. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
The country will be better because you are serving. And so we appreciate it. We'll see you all tomorrow morning. Thank you.